Hello, I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz. Welcome to our Liberty Alert. From LCRL is in the middle of all this stuff. In fact, our offices are at 3rd and Massachusetts in Washington, D.C., and my, how things have changed. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today, especially, it's a post-election edition. We're talking about what's next. And of course, our goal here, we're not a political show. We're a program that's talking about what does this mean for the church going forward. We're a religious liberty organization, and we're going to talk about the issues of religious liberty and what this next 100 days even is going to mean for the church. We've got a special guest again today, Tim Goeglein from Focus on the Family. He's a great friend of the LCRL, and he's going to be here with us. We're going to talk about these things from our perspective. He's been on the Hill a lot longer than I have, and so we're going to talk about a lot of these things that we've never really seen before. Good morning, Tim. How are you today?
It's so nice to be with you. Good morning, Greg.
It's great to be with you too. So again, for those of you who have been following us, again, go to our webpage, lcrlfreedom.org, and you can see all the past Liberty Alerts. But today, a special post-election edition, what's next? And so, Tim, I just start with you. What's next?
Well, may I say, there's never been a more appropriately named program than Liberty Alert,
Right.
because those of us who are Christians really, truly better buckle up, because we are going to see a winnowing of our religious liberty. We are going to see a winnowing of our speech liberty. And above all, if I may say, we are witnessing the combination of where this axis of liberty with regard to conscience and religion cross over, Greg, with speech. I think it's very serious. That is one issue.
Right.
The next issue which is not unrelated, is the issue of human life, sanctity of life. A friend of mine, only half jokingly, who shares our pro-life views, said that the new president, President Biden, is going to have carpal tunnel syndrome from signing all of the executive orders, which will negate all of the pro-life executive orders of President Trump and Vice President Pence. So I think that this whole body of sanctity of life issues, from personnel to policy, and this crossover between religious liberty and freedom of speech, Greg, I think these are quite genuinely the two immediate, tangible threats to the church and to those of us who are believers.
And I see the same thing, because, I've been there now 4 years, going on 4 years, and behind the scenes, the rhetoric, there's always the demonization, or there's the euphemisms of cover, and then there's the real dialogue that's going on. And I've always been shocked that the church doesn't understand. They're being, even Donald Trump, some of the stuff he did, people were calling him a fascist, and I kept saying, you can't be a fascist if you're giving liberty back to people. You cannot be a fascist if you're actually giving average citizens more rights, or reducing regulation or things like that, or protecting life. That's not what fascists do. What fascists do is what we're going to see happen in the first 100 days. We're going to be having liberties taken away from law-abiding citizens. We're going to have things, life protections, completely obliterated, all by the signature of a pen, or all by a signature. And so we're looking at these things and saying, I guess the church better wake up and realize, no, they're not going to talk straight to you about what they're going to do. They're just going to do it. And I think you've seen some of that in the Capitol just this week, the militarization of the Capitol. Have you ever seen anything like this before in your time?
I have genuinely never seen anything like this before. I was actually on Capitol Hill on January 6th, Epiphany, the day that all of the trouble began and happened. And of course, we all know that for every action, there is a reaction. And I think it's fair to say that within just a few hours of that really miserable day on Capitol Hill, those on the left and those on the right, Greg, rightfully concluded that we're going to see a reaction to this action.
Right.
But nothing in my experience of 30 plus years living and working in Washington equals what has now occurred in the city. We have more than 25,000 National Guardsmen who have ringed a very comparatively small city. We have policemen and policewomen from all over the Mid-Atlantic, and I think perhaps other parts of the country who have come into Washington. We have boats on the Potomac. We have helmeted guardsmen. We have, not to mention, the Secret Service and the Federal Protective Service. We have barbed wire, 7 feet iron fences, which have totally encased the Supreme Court, the House, the Senate, the Capitol building,
Wow.
the White House, Lafayette Square, across from the White House, and, if I may say, for several blocks surrounding all of the above.
Yeah, you got, I think
A good friend of mine was in East Berlin at the height of the Cold War, and he said this is what it looked like.
yeah, and it's, when you think about it, there were a lot of us who were saying, you know, I wrote a piece on vigilante violence never advances the cause. It always destroys ultimately the cause. And of course, we had MLK Day on Monday, and he was the same kind of thing. Violence isn't going to advance the cause. And yet we saw all summer long violence all over our country. And all law-abiding citizens wanted was the same kind of, shut this down. Well, we didn't get any of that. And now we're getting something, like you said, that looks like basically locking down the Capitol in a way that even 9/11 did not force us to do. And so my biggest thing was, and then the deplatforming that started happening across the country. And we got a little bit of that here. I wrote that article about vigilante violence and the kind of the Christian perspective on that, no matter what you think the right cause is, type of thing. And we were rejected in terms of we couldn't push it out. We usually take an ad and kind of push it out to our friends or push it out to the public. We only wanted to make sure all of our friends read the article, and we were rejected. And we posted it twice. We were rejected twice. So, you start asking the question. Now, we're not Parler, we're not these big organizations, but if they can kind of make sure your perspective doesn't get out there to your own people, wow. You would think that civil libertarians, left and right, would be up in arms about this, but I don't see that. How about you?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this because in one sense, all religion is local.
Right.
I like to marry, if I may, some of the points that you just made with the earlier question about the geography of our national capital. Within just a few blocks of the Capitol Dome, Greg, are several churches.
Right.
This is I think it's fair to say, one of the most underreported realities in America, that in addition to all of the beautiful federal buildings, and they are beautiful, we have a lot of beautiful churches. And in fact, in the immediate area of Capitol Hill, I think we have 12 to 15 churches. I mean, easily accessible to the Hill. And yet when this security perimeter was put up, I don't really even know if any pastors or priests, there could be some Jewish or Islamic religious communities that are also in the area. I'm assuming that there are. I don't know if any of them were consulted about the impact that this would have on their religious liberty and their worship freedom. And in fact, near to my own office, I noticed that there were 3 churches that fell within the early red zone.
Right.
I'm completely clueless as to whether those pastors or priests were given any heads up or given any view of how this might impact their services. But that really, in America, should be right at the top of our priority.
I'd like to talk to Father Gurney over at St. Joseph's. He's right around the corner from our office, and he's become a good friend of ours. Yeah, I'm going to give him a call this afternoon and see what again, do they even consult us? And you would think, again, if this is a First Amendment protection from the government, freedom to worship, freedom to assemble for worship.
Yes. Yes.
You would think that the government would be concerned about that. And what you see on a broad scale is a tremendous lack of concern. And we've seen it all throughout the pandemic, you
Right.
know, absolutely no consultation, as if the church just needs to get on board and do what they're told. And
Yeah,
again,
and may I say to that point, if I may, because it fits in with the second point that you raised just a moment ago, which is that last summer here in Washington, we watched riots, vandalism,
right.
fires, the closure of business. In fact, I witnessed it with my own eyes. We had churches that were a very historic church that was torched in the central part of Washington, D.C. We had a mob that rushed the White House. We had over 60 Secret Service or federal protective personnel who were hurt or injured as a result of various melees in the central part of Washington, D.C. And in fact, Greg, it became so bad one day that the Secret Service actually made a decision to take the President of the United States into a White House bunker.
Yeah, and if I can stop you there, if I
Please.
recall, and I think I recall they made fun of President Trump for kind of being scared or going into protective custody. And contrast that with how we're talking about the issues today. Again, we as people, as fair-minded citizens, we just want some balance. We want to know, what are we seeing, what are we hearing? And if you count this but don't count that, or you report this but you don't report that, we don't know
Yes.
what to think about any of these things.
Well, I think it's true. And I think it's also true that at the height of the Civil War, we had a president, Abraham Lincoln, who jailed editors, who suspended habeas corpus, who took over the United States Telegraph to regulate, what was said or not said vis-a-vis communication along that line. In World War I, President Woodrow Wilson created a national and international communications umbrella that had the first say in perhaps one of the most powerful propaganda and communication takeovers in the history of the United States. And I don't mind saying that in World War II, there were very many similar things at the height of the war. And I think, these are realities. These are not opinions. These are facts. Presidents and the press, the legislative branch and the media, and how the free flow of information actually happens. And those of us who are biblical Christians have been watching warning signs, regardless of party, regardless of who's in the Oval Office, regardless of who's the majority leader or the Speaker of the House, certainly the 9 members of the Supreme Court. We have watched this now on and off for the last 25 years. And repeatedly, we have been saying to all of our fellow Christians and believers, be careful, watch out, because what is coming in this tidal wave is going to directly, eventually impact you. Well, we've arrived, and we have to be able to say what we are seeing and what we are experiencing. Because, Greg, if we don't speak out, we will lose our liberties. Those are facts.
Well, and again, just so people understand, whatever your politics, and if you're thinking, oh, you guys are talking about stuff just because the Conservative Party lost or something like that. No, basically, our issues, what we struggle with, is trying to make sure that the church has a free voice in our culture. That's the only reason why I'm in DC. I was an evangelist of our church. And I want our church to be able to be the church, to preach the whole counsel of God to anyone who will listen. They can freely reject or freely receive. And that's what I want. What I'm seeing in this new legislation, and we saw it right before the election, we warned about it, and now we're seeing that in the next 100 days, we can see some of this stuff actually rapid fire hit us. We're seeing people say, if you have a Christian worldview, if you have a biblical moral worldview, you will be silenced. You will be demonized. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. And that's our concern. And what we're saying is we're seeing the power of the government. They can lock down like you've never seen before. And I always say, imagine what Mao Zedong or Mussolini or even a rogue president can do if they owned Facebook. And if they owned Google, if they were aligned with those powerful platforms, and back in the early days, like you were talking about, they might be able to limit what speech came out of Washington, but they couldn't limit what was in your heart and what was being said in your church or what was actually being shared, person to person. They can do that now. And
Yeah,
so what
well,
we're again,
yeah,
so
and
what
I have to
that's our
say,
interest.
yeah, I have to say, we saw an example of this in the most dramatic way that I think we have seen, perhaps in 25 years, even in the contemporary chapter of wokeism and identity politics, and et cetera. We have a United States senator who, with other senators, morally, legally, ethically, decided to challenge the Electoral College outcome
Right.
in more than one state. The Constitution and Senate precedent allows this particular U.S. senator to have pursued this line to advance his viewpoint. And regardless of how people feel about whether in the House or the Senate the Electoral College outcomes should have been challenged, I really do mean this, Greg. Regardless of that view, within 24 hours of the mayhem on Capitol Hill, this particular senator had a book contract which was canceled, revoked. And of course, we all apply, the typical rhetoric to this particular time. We say, well, he was a victim of cancel culture. But a very prominent editor in Washington, I think, said it more aptly. He said, we used to call this blacklisting.
Right.
And that's exactly what has happened.
Yeah,
in the United States.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm watching what I don't know if it's Netflix or something like that. And of course we're seeing this blacklisting and they're talking about movies about blacklisting. We're watching blacklisting happen right before our eyes, and nobody's going to write a movie about this one because the very people who own Hollywood are the blacklisters again. And again, I know who you're talking about. He really truly is one of a shining star of a person of great character. And again, he's going to be demonized, just like Judge Kavanaugh was demonized. I think we're going to have to figure out how to respond to this, because you can't demonize the platform of Judeo-Christian moral view of life. You can't demonize that platform. That platform, marriage, sanctity of life, religious liberty, that platform is a good platform for even the people who disagree with it. And so there's no way it can be demonized as somehow this kind of fascist thing. All right, well, let's jump ahead and see, we do know that stuff is coming. I've been reading on this. I know you've been reading on this. What is the next 100 days going to look like?
Well, as I say, it's going to be a winnowing of the right to life and religious liberty. And I mentioned earlier the quip about carpal tunnel syndrome. And the new president. I'd like to give just one major example, if I may, because there is going to be a cavalcade of executive orders and early decisions that do not need congressional approval to turn back and to revoke the Trump-Pence administration's outstanding, sterling track record in defense of the sanctity of life. And Greg, one of the examples is something called the Mexico City policy. My guess is that the overwhelming majority of pro-life Americans do not know or have never heard of the Mexico City Agreement. But the Mexico City Agreement is one of the most landmark, important pro-life policies since Roe against Wade in 1973. It is a policy that says not a dime of taxpayer money will be used overseas to fund or promote abortion. That seems pretty clear. In a country that is divided on the right to life, it seems to me that that's a rational, sensible policy dating from the Reagan administration. Well, it turns out that the Mexico City Agreement is going to be among the first executive orders that is turned back. And let me just say that, to ring the bell backwards. What that means is that beginning with the Biden-Harris administration, taxpayer dollars will be used to fund or to promote abortion overseas. For those of us who are pro-life, that is unconscionable. but that's where we're going. And that's only one example of the many. And in fact, if you and I had, 3 more hours just to talk about the revocation of sanctity of life policies, from one administration, the most pro-life administration in American history, to what will be essentially an empire of abortion. Biden and Harris are abortion absolutists. They will absolutely and under no circumstance allow any limit on abortion. And so the Mexico City Agreement is only one of a cavalcade of policies that will be revoked. And Greg, I'd like to use one example for personnel, because personnel is policy.
Right.
They are promoting the most pro-abortion member of any cabinet ever. He is presently a state elected official in California, and they want him to be the new Secretary of Health and Human Services. This California state official has a history of cracking down on nuns, has a history of cracking down on pregnancy resource centers, and has made the pro-life movement in the state of California one of his anti-life projects. He has a long record of anti-human life policy. And let's remember that the Secretary of Health and Human Services is one of the most important domestic cabinet agencies. Personnel is policy, and we are about ready to exchange one of the most pro-life secretaries of HHS, Alex Azar, unfortunately, for a person who has allowed himself and eagerly and passionately is an abortion absolutist.
Well, and you remember again the little sisters of the poor. When you see what the federal government was willing to do to them, now we're going to have that on a national scale. The other thing, and again, this is the one that concerns me the most. We talked about the Equality Act, we talked about the transgender movement and all those things, where basically, I think Biden has committed himself to actually obliterate the notion of sex. There's going to be no such thing as male and female. And again, for those of you who are Bible believing people, as well as people of science, there's XXXY. There's male and there's female. And we've learned how to differentiate and also to hold them equally as precious. They're coming in now with an administration that's going to wipe that out. And anybody who then says there's such a thing as male, female, and this includes the feminists, by the way, Title IX people, all these kind of folks too, they're, again, all those protections, all those kind of things are going to be wiped out. And then the church, if the church actually teaches God created us male and female, and in marriage, all these kind of things, you're going to be litigated like you've never been litigated before. And again, when we talked about this, I don't think people really think this is coming. And that's been my biggest concern. It can actually shut the church's voice down. And that's what we worry about most.
Yeah. First, so I'm taking a license here. I think actually, Greg, of all the conversations that you and I have ever had on this program, we've certainly had fantastic conversations, apart from our time together here on the Liberty Report. Mm-hmm. But you have, in my view, just outlined the number one impact on the church of this new administration, but far bigger of the new culture we are in, which is presently the church is allowed by constitutional protection the ability to make its own decisions theologically. And historically, for all of the deeply troubling attacks on religious liberty that you and I and many others have witnessed over many years, the one sacrosanct policy of religious liberty, of personnel and policy decision-making within churches and within Christian universities, colleges, seminaries, by and large, and there are exceptions, those have been sacrosanct. But in the era that we're in and where we're going legally is to 100% breach that wall. That's where we're going.
Right.
By personnel and policy, the number one goal of those who believe that we have too much free speech, above all, too much religious liberty. What they want and they are building a series of cases around the country to eventually and incrementally level that sacrosanctity. They want to level that wall, and they want to be able to have the state and government reach inside and say to a church or a religious entity, you no longer have the right to make independent personnel and policy decisions rooted in your theology. In other words, it's truth is the great casualty of our age, and it is not hyperbole. It is not rhetoric. This is definitively where we're going.
Well, and this is why we're in Washington, D.C. As I said before, we're a religious liberty organization. No matter what your politics, we're saying, let us be the church. And,
yes.
and that's all we're fighting for at this point. But again, I'm trying to explain to our people, it's worth fighting for. You're going to have to learn how to fight for your First Amendment rights so that you can serve the gospel into your community or into people's lives. You know, that two kingdom ability to differentiate God's work is what we're all about. Tim, thanks so much for being here with us today. I love what you just said. There's an administration now that thinks we have too much religious liberty, too much free speech, and too much talk about sanctity of life. And we're going to see what that means in policy terms. And remember, we talk on this program about policy. We talk about principles and policy and how they affect the church so that the church can be the church for others. And we're going to keep trying to inform you to the best of our ability so that you can be prepared. So in closing, I'll just say this. Folks, don't be afraid to speak the truth. I mean, that's what it's all about, to be bold about the things of God. It's God's word. It's God's mission. It's God's, and all this is in God's hands. It doesn't mean that we're not going to run into some tremendous headwinds in the next couple of years. But again, be Christ Church for the sake of others. That's what we're all about. But also, you need to learn your First Amendment rights now more than ever. So, Tim, thanks for being with us today. I know your perspective, you've been here for a long time, and it's kind of shocking, but at the same time, we know that, that God gives us wisdom to kind of move through whatever storm.
Thank you so much. I remain very hopeful, and with you, Greg, we will promise and pledge to be very vigilant about what is coming at us.
Yes, we will. We love the church. We love our country, and we know that God gives us wisdom to deal with these things, and we will try to be servants to Him and to the people that we serve. So again, till we see Him face to face, speak the truth in love, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Until next time, God richly bless you. Bye-bye.